The flaw in perfection. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above her workstation, her eyes burning from 20 straight hours of analyzing warp field data. Something was wrong with the numbers, but none of the Galactic Alliance engineers would listen. They couldn't, or wouldn't, see it. The Harmony-class starship above Earth glowed like a jewel in the night sky, its crystalline hull refracting starlight in patterns that still took Sarah's breath away. The Alliance's technology was centuries ahead of humanity's crude attempts at faster-than-light travel. Their warp drives were mathematical perfection, each quantum field precisely aligned, every subspace resonance tuned to exact frequencies derived from equations so advanced they might as well have been magic. And that was exactly the problem. You're still here. The familiar warble of Anxforth's translator cut through her concentration. The Cerebian scientist's iridescent feathers rippled with concern as they glided into her lab. The Alliance delegation leaves in 6 hours. You should rest. Look at this. Sarah gestured at the hologram, where a cascade of equations spelled out what she was certain would become a disaster. The warranty's about to expire on their perfection. Anxforth's head crest rose in confusion. The Alliance's warp technology is flawless. Every calculation, every quantum alignment is too perfect. Sarah interrupted. She manipulated the display, highlighting specific data points. Space isn't perfect, Annex. It's messy, chaotic, full of quantum fluctuations and subspace eddies. When you try to impose absolute mathematical precision on chaos, you create order, Anxforth stated firmly, reciting standard Alliance doctrine. You create brittleness, Sarah corrected. She pulled up another display, showing the Harmony's warp field harmonics. Look at these resonance patterns. They're maintaining perfect alignment by brute forcing their way through natural spatial distortions. It's like building a perfect crystal bridge and expecting it to survive an earthquake. Anxforth's feathers shifted to a troubled azure. But the drives have worked flawlessly for centuries. Because space was calmer then. Sarah brought up stellar activity charts. We're entering a period of increased quantum turbulence. These perfect drives can't adapt. They can't flex. When a big enough distortion hits, she snapped her fingers. That's impossible. The Alliance would have. A priority alert cut through their argument. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the message. 3 Alliance ships had just suffered catastrophic warp drive failures in the Carina sector. Thousands were dead. Impossible, Anxforth whispered, their feathers now pale with shock. Sarah was already pulling up the failure data, her fingers flying across the holographic controls. The universe doesn't care about impossible. It cares about what works. She glanced at the Harmony, still gleaming overhead. And we got about 6 hours before that ship's drive fails too. The Alliance would never accept human modifications to their sacred designs, Anxforth said, but their voice held a note of uncertainty. Sarah smiled grimly. Then we'd better not ask permission. She pulled up the ship's engineering schematics. Want to help me save 5,000 lives, and probably commit about 15 violations of Alliance engineering protocols. Anxforth's feathers rippled through a complex pattern of colors before settling on a determined goal. Tell me what you need. Sarah cracked her knuckles and began typing. First, we're going to introduce some deliberate imperfections into their perfect system. The Alliance is going to hate it, but sometimes the best solutions are the ones that look like mistakes to everyone else. The first warning alarms began to sound from the Harmony above, right on schedule. Sarah just hoped they had enough time to prove that humanity's greatest engineering strength wasn't in achieving perfection. It was in learning to work with imperfection. The race to save the Harmony had begun. Breaking the rules. Engineering override. Alpha 709. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she input the emergency access codes. Next to her, Anxforth's feathers had taken on the dark crimson of extreme stress as they monitored the Harmony's deteriorating warp field. Security will detect our intrusion in approximately 3 minutes, Anxforth warbled, their translator barely keeping up with their agitated speech. The Alliance's response will be severe. Then we'd better be quick. Sarah's code flowed across the holographic interface, deliberately introducing calculated flaws into the Alliance's perfect systems. Each change felt like sacrilege, like finger painting over a priceless masterpiece. How's the field holding? Quantum coherence at 68% and falling. Ankh-Svorth's head crest flattened in dismay. The distortion wave will hit in 17 minutes. Sarah swore under her breath. The massive subspace turbulence approaching a harmony would shatter its brittle, perfectly aligned warp field like a hammer through glass, unless they could make it bend instead of break. Dr. Chen. The sharp voice cut through the tension. Sarah turned to find Chief Administrator Valoran floating in the doorway, their crystalline form pulsing with angry red light. Step away from the console immediately. With respect, Administrator. Sarah kept typing. We don't have time for this. The Harmony's drive is going to fail. Nonsense. Valoran's translation crystal chimed with dismissal. Our systems are perfect. That's exactly the problem. Sarah gestured at the readings. Look at these harmonics. Your drive can't handle the quantum turbulence because it's not designed to adapt. It's too rigid, too perfect. And you propose to fix this by introducing deliberate errors. Valoran's crystal structure vibrated with incredulity. This is madness. It's engineering. Sarah pulled up the failure data from the Carina sector. 3 ships already lost because their drives couldn't handle the new spatial conditions. We can save the Harmony, but you have to let me finish. Security teams are 90 seconds out. Ankh-Svorth warned, their feathers now almost black with anxiety. Valoran studied the data, their crystalline surface refracting light in complex patterns of thought. The consequences will be less severe than 5,000 dead crew members. Sarah interrupted. She met the administrator's gaze. Sometimes you have to break the rules to save lives. The security alert klaxons began to wail. Valoran's surface rippled with decision patterns. You have 5 minutes, Dr. Chen. After that, I will personally ensure you never work in engineering again. Sarah's fingers flew across the controls. Ankh-Svorth, start implementing the modifications to the quantum matrix. We need to introduce controlled chaos into the system. This violates every principle of Alliance engineering, Ankh-Svorth said, even as they began the adjustments. Principles don't keep ships intact. Sarah's code continued to flow, deliberately imperfect, deliberately messy. Humans learned this the hard way. Sometimes you need flexibility more than precision. Sometimes you need to work with the chaos instead of fighting it. The Harmony's warp field readings began to shift, becoming less mathematically perfect but more stable, like a reed bending in the wind instead of a crystal shattering. 2 minutes to impact, Ankh-Svorth announced. Their feathers had taken on an odd mixture of colors Sarah had never seen before, fear and hope combined. Valoran watched the readings with growing agitation. The field harmonics are completely desynchronized. This should be causing a cascade failure. Watch, Sarah said softly. The massive subspace distortion wave hit the Harmony's modified field. For a moment, everything hung in the balance. Then the reading stabilized. The warp field bent, shifted, adapted, but held. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Impossible, Valoran whispered. No, Sarah smiled tiredly. Just imperfect. Sometimes that's better. The security teams burst in, weapons ready. Sarah raised her hand slowly, but kept smiling. She'd saved the ship. Whatever came next was worth it. Valoran's surface showed complex patterns of conflict. Take Dr. Chen and Ankh-Svorth into custody, they'd ordered. But preserve their modifications to the drive. We will need to study this further. As the security officers led them away, Sarah caught Ankh-Svorth's eye. The Cerebian's feathers had settled into a color she recognized: satisfaction. They'd broken all the rules, violated sacred principles, and introduced chaos into perfection. but they'd saved 5,000 lives. More importantly, they'd proved that sometimes the best solutions weren't the most perfect ones. Now they just had to convince the rest of the Alliance of that. Somehow, Sarah suspected that would be the harder task. Human chaos theory. The Grand Chamber of the Alliance Engineering Council stretched above Sarah like a cathedral built of light and mathematics. Crystalline beings, energy forms, and various organic species filled the tiered seating, all focused on the central platform where she stood with Angsforth. The air hummed with disapproval. Dr. Sarah Chen, High Commissioner Ixtal's voice resonated through the chamber, their energy form pulsing with formal patterns. You stand accused of unauthorized modification of Alliance technology, violation of engineering protocols, and corruption of established principles. How do you plead? Sarah stepped forward. The modification was necessary and successful. The harmony survived because... That is not the question, Ixtal interrupted. The protocols exist for a reason. Perfection must be maintained. Perfection is killing us, Sarah countered. She gestured to the holographic display showing the growing wave of quantum turbulence spreading across the galaxy. 3 more ships lost in the past week alone. The turbulence is getting worse, and your perfect drives can't handle it. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Valoran floated forward, their crystalline surface showing complex patterns of internal conflict. The humans' modifications to the Harmony's drive were effective, they admitted reluctantly. But they violate every principle of proper engineering. Perhaps our principles need to change. The new voice came from Christ, a young quantum theorist whose plasma form sparkled with excitement. I've analyzed Dr. Chen's modifications. The controlled chaos she introduced actually strengthens the field harmonics under stress. Heresy. An older Alliance engineer's photonic matrix flared with outrage. Our methods have served us for millennia. And now they're failing. Angsforth's translator cut through the growing argument. Their feathers had taken on the bold copper color of conviction. I've seen the human approach work. It's not elegant, but it's adaptive, like life itself. Sarah seized the moment. The universe isn't perfect, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. It's wild, chaotic, beautiful. You've spent thousands of years trying to impose perfect order on it, and it worked. Until now. But the chaos is growing, and your perfect systems can't bend. They can only break. She brought up new displays, showing the modified drive diagnostics. Look at these patterns. They're messy, yes. Imperfect, absolutely. But they work with the chaos instead of against it. Like surfing a wave instead of trying to stop it. Surfing. Ixtal's energy form flickered with confusion. A human water sport, Christ explained, their plasma form brightening with interest. They ride on naturally occurring ocean waves for recreation. Instead of fighting the water's chaos, they work with it. Exactly. Sarah smiled. Humanity's greatest engineering achievements came when we stopped trying to force nature to follow our rules and started working with its own patterns instead. Sometimes you need controlled chaos to handle natural chaos. The chamber erupted in debate. Sarah watched as younger engineers began examining her modifications with growing excitement, while the older generation pulsed with patterns of horror and denial. This is more than a technical issue, Valoran observed quietly. You're challenging our entire philosophy of engineering. Someone had to, Sarah replied. Before we lose more ships. Suddenly, emergency alerts flashed across every display in the chamber. A massive Alliance research vessel, the Eternal Symmetry, was reporting critical drive failures as it encountered the turbulence wave. The Symmetry carries 10,000 researchers, Christ announced, their plasma form pale with concern. Standard protocols aren't stabilizing the drive. All eyes and sensory organs turned to Sarah. The High Commissioner's energy form swirled with conflicting patterns before settling. Dr. Chen, can you save them? Sarah was already moving to the control interface. Yes, but I'll have to break about 100 more of your rules to do it. Ixtal's energy patterns showed resignation. Do it. As Sarah's fingers flew across the controls, introducing carefully calculated imperfections into the symmetry's drive systems, she caught Anxforth's eye. Their feathers had taken on that same odd mix of fear and hope. They weren't just saving the ship now. They were forcing the Alliance to confront a fundamental truth. Sometimes perfection wasn't perfect enough. Sometimes you needed the human touch, the willingness to embrace chaos, to break rules, to get messy in the pursuit of something that actually worked. The real question was whether the Alliance could adapt to this new reality, or if their pursuit of perfection would be their undoing. The price of progress. The quantum turbulence has spread to 87% of Alliance space, Christ reported, their plasma form dimmed with exhaustion. We've modified drives on 16 critical vessels using Dr. Chen's methods, but the Council is still blocking widespread implementation. Sarah stared at the galactic map floating above the emergency command center. Red markers showed failed or failing ships, while blue ones indicated successfully modified vessels. There were far too many of the former. How many more have to die before they accept change? Anxforth's feathers had taken on the gray of deep frustration. Their temporary cell in the command center might be comfortable, but it was still a cell. It's not that simple, Valoran said, their crystalline surface showing troubled patterns. Dr. Chen's modifications work, yes, but they require constant adjustment, intuition, a willingness to experiment. The last word seemed to cause them physical discomfort. Heaven forbid engineers should have to think on their feet, Sarah muttered, but her heart wasn't in the sarcasm. She understood their fear. The Alliance had built their civilization on predictability, on the promise that if you followed the rules perfectly, everything would work perfectly. The alert klaxon shattered her thoughts. Multiple drive failures in the Orient sector, Christ announced. The Academy of Higher Mathematics, and by the eternal equations, the Grand Archive. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Grand Archive was the repository of Alliance knowledge stretching back millennia. How many on board? 30,000 on the Academy station, 12,000 in the archive. Both facilities are reporting critical drive failures. The turbulence wave will reach them in 43 minutes. Valoran's surface showed decision patterns. Dr. Chen, if you had full access to our systems and complete authority to implement your modifications, I could save maybe one of them, Sarah said quietly. Not both. Not in the time we have. The chamber fell silent except for the wail of alarms. Then we need more humans. The new voice came from High Commissioner Ixtal, who had entered unnoticed. Their energy forms swirled with grim determination. Every human engineer with practical experience, every technician who's ever had to make something work with inadequate resources. We need them all. The Council will never, Valoran began. The Council is dissolved, Ixtal interrupted. I've invoked emergency powers. Humanity's methods are now our only hope. Sarah was already moving. I'll need quantum links to both facilities, direct access to their drive controls, and get me Earth on the comm. Every engineer who's ever hot-wired a car or jury-rigged a satellite is about to get a crash course in warp drive modification. The next 38 minutes were controlled chaos. Sarah coordinated teams of human engineers patched in from Earth, teaching them on the fly how to introduce controlled imperfection into Alliance systems. Some were NASA scientists, others were mechanics from small-town garages, all bringing their uniquely human perspective to the problem. The quantum field is like a suspension bridge in a hurricane, she explained to one group. It needs to flex, to dance with the turbulence. Perfect alignment will snap. We need to make it messy, make it human. To another team, forget everything you know about ideal harmonics. Think about tuning an old radio. Sometimes you get better reception when it's slightly off station. Anxforth monitored the results, their feathers shifting through patterns of amazement as they watched humans apply their chaotic creativity to Alliance technology. They're all doing it differently, they observed. No two solutions are exactly alike. That's the point. Sarah grinned, even as she guided 3 different teams, Through drive modifications, we're not trying to impose perfect order. We're working with the chaos, letting each solution adapt to its specific situation. With 2 minutes to spare, both facilities reported stable drive fields. The turbulence wave washed over them like a tide over a flexible reed, and both survived. The command center erupted in very human cheers, joined by the equivalent expressions of joy from various Alliance species. Sarah caught Valoran studying the success statistics with an expression that, even on their crystalline features, could only be called wonder. "I don't understand," the administrator admitted. Every human team used a different approach, different modifications, different imperfections. By all our principles, this should have been disaster. "Welcome to human engineering," Sarah said softly, "where the perfect solution is whatever actually works." Imperfect solutions. The grand hall of harmonious engineering had changed. Where once perfect crystalline patterns had decorated its walls, now new designs sprouted, organic, asymmetrical, beautiful in their controlled chaos. Sarah smiled as she walked past them, remembering how just 3 months ago, such displays would have been considered technological heresy. "The latest test results are remarkable," Christ announced, their plasma form practically sparking with excitement as they joined her. "The human-modified drives are showing a 97% adaptation rate to quantum turbulence. The old designs never exceeded 60%, even at their peak." More importantly, Ankesworth added, their feathers shimmering with pride, "We haven't lost a single ship since implementing the new protocols." They no longer needed to add human protocols. The distinction between human and Alliance engineering was blurring more each day. Sarah paused before the entrance to the council chamber. "How's the old guard taking it?" "About as well as you'd expect," Valoran answered, drifting up to join them. Their crystalline surface showed complex patterns of amusement, an expression they'd never displayed before the crisis. Changes, difficult for beings who have lived millennia believing in perfect order. But the results are undeniable. The chamber doors swept open. Inside, the tiered seating was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. But unlike Sarah's last appearance here, the atmosphere hummed with anticipation rather than disapproval. High Commissioner Ixtal's energy form pulsed with formal patterns as they began the session. 3 months ago, we faced the greatest crisis in Alliance history. Our perfect systems were failing. Our rigid adherence to mathematical ideology was costing lives. They paused, their energy patterns showing something very like humor. And then humanity taught us how to fail better. Appreciative murmurs filled the chamber. Sarah felt Ankesworth's feathers brush her shoulder in silent support. "Dr. Sarah Chen," Ixtal continued, "your actions violated virtually every engineering principle we held sacred. You introduced chaos into order, imperfection into perfection. You taught us that adaptation requires flexibility, that survival sometimes means embracing uncertainty." Their energy form brightened, and in doing so, you may have saved not just ships and lives, but the very future of Alliance technology. Sarah stepped forward. "With respect, Commissioner, I didn't do it alone. Every human engineer who helped that day, every Alliance scientist who was willing to question their assumptions, we all proved something important. The universe isn't perfect. Maybe we shouldn't try to be either." Indeed, Valoran floated to the center of the chamber, which is why the Council has approved the establishment of the new Adaptive Engineering Division, a joint human-alliance initiative dedicated to finding solutions that work rather than solutions that merely look perfect on paper. Christ's plasma form pulsed with scholarly interest. "We're already seeing applications beyond drive technology. Medical systems, environmental controls, even quantum computing. The principles of controlled chaos are revolutionizing every field. And this is just the beginning," Ankesworth added, their feathers taking on the bold copper of certainty. "Humanity's greatest gift to us wasn't just a new way to build drives. It was a new way to think about problems." Sarah looked around the chamber, at beings of crystal and energy and organic matter, all united in their newfound appreciation for imperfection. So what's next? That, Ixel said, their energy form showing genuine warmth, is beautifully uncertain. And for the first time in Alliance history, we're looking forward to finding out. Later, standing in her lab, Sarah watched a new class of Alliance engineers, young beings of various species, working alongside human instructors. They were learning not just how to modify drive systems, but how to think creatively, to experiment, to embrace the chaos inherent in the universe. On her desk sat two items: her original multi-tool, battered and imperfect but reliable, and a piece of Alliance crystal, its surface etched with perfectly mathematical patterns. Together, they symbolize something new, a fusion of human adaptability and Alliance precision, of chaos and order, of the perfect and the practical. Still getting used to the changes? Ainsworth asked, gliding up beside her. Sarah smiled, watching a young crystalline engineer deliberately introduce a controlled flaw into a test system, their surface showing pride rather than horror at the imperfection. Change is messy, she said. That's how you know it's working. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and gloriously chaotic. And now, finally, the Alliance was ready to dance with that chaos rather than fight it. Not despite humanity's imperfect methods, but because of them. Sometimes the best solutions weren't the most perfect ones. Sometimes they were just the ones that worked. And in teaching the Alliance this simple truth, humanity had helped forge something new. A future where perfection and imperfection could coexist, where chaos and order could dance together in the vast cosmic engine of progress. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And that was exactly the point.